Yo, yo, yo. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, and I'm back from vacay. I've been on holiday last week. It was nice. 3-month-old baby is not necessarily the kind of holiday that you might expect if you're used to just kind of like lying on the beach and doing nothing. But it was enjoyable nonetheless. But I'm back in the saddle now, and it is only just over 1 week until Unparsed, the world's first conversation design conference in London on the 24th and 25th of July. I better just check those dates because I've been on holiday. My head's all over the place. 24th and 25th, that's right. In London, we've moved the venue now. It is now at Coin Street, right next to Waterloo Station. Now, I won't get into the details of why the venue's moved, but it is moved. It is actually going to be a lot better. The tickets are still available. You can go to unparsedconf.com to get your tickets. There's a few tickets left. Unparsedconf.com if you want to get your tickets. There's a 2-for-1 on right now if you're watching this live on LinkedIn and YouTube, but that will be taken down probably by the end of today or by the end of tomorrow. So if you do want to get a ticket for your colleagues for free, you can go there right now, unparsedconf.com. The world's first conversation design conference coming to London. It's going to be absolutely immense. You do not want to miss it. I'd like to give a shout out as well to our presenting sponsor today. It is Tidio. So Tidio is an AI-powered customer experience software platform. It's got a conversational AI component. It's got a live chat component. It's designed for small to medium-sized online businesses, retailers, and things like that. It helps you maximize your support capacity without additional hiring costs. Remember, scaling is one of the real benefits of using conversational AI. It has its track record as it answers 80% of questions successfully, which isn't too bad. And also, it's got out-of-the-box use cases for things like product availability, shipping, order status, returns, all of that kind of stuff. So if you are a small to medium-sized business and you're running online as a retailer, then you could definitely check out Tidio. The live chat platform built in means that when you escalate from the chat conversation to the live chat, it's absolutely seamless, and it's absolutely fantastic. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It also does recommendations and discounts based on previous behavior that your customers exhibit on your website. So if you want to achieve more with fewer resources, then try Tidio today. You can visit tidio.com/VUX. And if you register there, then you will receive a 20% discount because you've been sent there from the VUX podcast. You can't say fairer than that, can you? Unless you can't pronounce your T's or your H's, of course, then you can't not say fairer than that. But definitely go to tidio.com/VUX. Thank you, Tidio, for presenting VUX World. Now, on with today's show, I have an epic guest coming up today. It is Andrei Papancha, who is the CEO and co-founder of NLX. Now, you may have come across NLX before. It's a conversational AI platform. It's doing things slightly differently. I'm very interested to talk to Andrei today because I've come across NLX numerous times in the past. Most recently, must have been beginning of this year, I think it was, when it announced Amazon announced its series of conversational AI partners. NLX was one of them. They've been doing some very interesting things with large language models, doing some very interesting things on the multimodal front, and I cannot wait to get into this conversation with the CEO, Andrei, right now. Andrei, welcome to VUX World, my friend.
Thank you, Kane. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me in New York right now, yeah?
Yeah, good old New York. Summer, pretty hot. Full checklist of things.
Nice, nice. And you got the memo about having the dark background. We're both on form here with some dark background.
I really thought we'd stay on brand, so absolutely.
Nice one. Well, thank you for joining me. Appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, so I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. Definitely keen to learn a bit about NLX. As I said in the intro there, I'm familiar with NLX in passing, being so sort of involved in this industry. You come across all of the platforms and technology companies. I definitely caught my eye when Amazon announced its partnerships. I think it was about the beginning of the year. And we were talking about Artie Merritt actually before this. I think it was Artie that was instigating a lot of that kind of stuff, which shout out to Artie Merritt. So yeah, definitely keen to learn a little bit more. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about NLX then.
Sounds good. First of all, I'm the CEO and Chief Product Officer of NLX. I'm technical by trade. I've been an engineer for as long as I can remember, learned a lot by doing, and around 2015, 2016, I found myself at American Express as one of their employees, and I got put in charge of building their conversational AI platform. That's what kind of got me to, introduced into the space and just whatever you can do with conversational AI, how you might scale this type of technology in an enterprise environment like American Express. And from there, I just spent a number of years working with other large companies within the realm of conversational AI, anything from like internal use cases to, again, customer facing ones. And around 2017, 2018, I just felt things could be done a little bit differently in the market, and I made it my co-founder's mission to change that.
Nice. And so Amex was working on chatbots then before 2017. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Interesting.
And to be
a difficult job. There was no tooling or anything available, was there?
No, there wasn't much. And to be honest, I've been building technology ever since I was in 5th grade. And I remember my parents opening up an LLC so I can legally sell my web development and design services. And one of the key attributes that I believe helped me with the project at Amex is that I always picked up projects I didn't know how to do, but I found interesting. So I remember on day one at Amex, they asked me, like, hey, how do you feel like working on bots? And I said, well, I don't really know what bots are, but let's do it. So I had a very untainted view of how one might build a conversational assistant or a platform. And an interesting thing while I was at American Express was that I went through the evaluation process of a lot of the NLP providers at the time in the market. This ranged from startups like what eventually became Dialogflow, but API.ai, to Wit.ai that was acquired by Facebook. I was one of their first 100 users. I remember like submitting little requests and bugs and getting like a pretty quick iteration from the team, all the way to companies like Nuance. And we ended up using Nuance for the NLP. But what was uncommon for a lot of these vendors is that I chose to build everything but the NLP. They were used to kind of selling this black box, that they pass to the enterprise and it just kind of works. And then I chose to build the overall system and architect it, and then choose the different NLP providers. And what was also interesting in practice is that the differences between the different NLPs were relatively insignificant. They had some performance differences in that, some were more accurate than others, but like with similar training data, they performed relatively the same. And ultimately, it didn't matter that you could tell someone's trying to file a dispute or a card or to replace their card if you didn't know, if you didn't have conversational content to automate the specific business process. So that was like a key learning that then became the foundation of how we do things at NLX, where all these different AI models and components, whether it's the NLP or the traditional NLP or large language models, they're plugins. You can swap them in and out because ultimately they have the same function. Some are better than others, and customers might have a preference for one versus the other, but ultimately they serve the same function in the holistic end-to-end system and how it's operationalized.
It's mad because I remember in 2018, every platform was really playing on the fact that they have better performing NLU than another. This NLU is 86% accurate on XYZ kind of industry or whatever. And I always remember we've had plenty of discussions about it, which is that over time, NLU components will become commoditized because they all basically work in the same way. They do the same thing. If they're given the right, maybe different NLU systems might require different types or different formatted training data to get more leverage out of them or whatever, but essentially they're kind of doing the same thing. So they become commoditized. I think we're probably not quite there, but I think we'll end up there, which is large language models will become commoditized because they're only going to be in the hands of a handful of providers. They're all built on the same architecture. They're all using the same sort of methodologies. So they're all going to give you a very similar kind of output, more or less. And so let's just say that, imagine that's the case. Large language models are commoditized, NLU systems are commoditized. What's the bit that you find through NLX is the stuff that isn't easily commoditized, but that's crucial in order to make this stuff work in practice?
It's essentially enabling end users and customers to effectively build these experiences at the speed of thought. Because based on my earlier analogy for American Express, where content was the biggest driver of automation. I mean, we had like a full-time staff that was just working through copy edits, and it's impressive what a few words and a comma can do to automation rates. Like, I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say for most credit card providers and banks, you have to let them know. Maybe that's changing a little bit, but at the time, most providers except for Amex, you had to let them know if you're traveling abroad, because otherwise they might block your transactions. So people, having been trained over the years to do that, they would go and like chat and say, hey, like I'm traveling to France, can you please make sure my card works? And the standard answer is, thank you for letting us know. Don't worry, you never have to let American Express know that you're traveling. We monitor your account, enjoy your trip, right? We always monitor your account, enjoy your trip. So really, that's like a good example of like an opportunity that can get automated all the time, but because of the habitual thing that people experience with other vendors, then Amex has to kind of deal with this. And the way you frame the language determines whether that person needs additional clarification and wants to speak to an agent or not. So having seen that, we already look at the market of both NLPs and LLMs as being commoditized. Even with the LLMs, for instance, we make that available, whether in a pure generative fashion or through embeddings, through our platform today, but we give you choice. You want to use OpenAI? Fine. You want to use Cohere or Anthropic? Fine. You want to use Amazon, any of the Amazon Bedrock models or Titan or whatever? Equally fine. They all kind of serve the same type of purpose, but ultimately, in practice, you'll always have to evolve the conversation with the customer, right? The world changes. There's another pandemic. There's a shift in consumer behavior. All these different things will constantly evolve these conversations. And no matter what the perception is, when it comes to an enterprise, you can't just run off of with pure generative content. Like brand, legal won't allow that. So you need to make sure you can make changes and evolve these conversations as fast as possible. So that's where we've put a lot of focus on, while of course having a cutting edge NLU stack. We do our own NLU, but then we allow customers to pick their own NLP. But ultimately, we know that pairing that with like powerful content management that's easy to use and intuitive and can be used by non-technical users is critical to these organizations being efficient, like long term. They don't want to wait 2 weeks to make a change. They want to make it within the first 5 minutes that they spotted that something might be wrong. Like, let's use an example for airlines, right? Or maybe because backtracking a little bit more, speech-to-text technology is imperfect. It's at the state of the art that's fascinating, but it's imperfect. Like my last name, Papanchan, it will never get picked up correctly by any speech-to-text engine. Your first and last names will not be transcribed correctly either. But sometimes these elements, like names, are part of a key like business process, right? Or someone might come in and say, hey, cancel flight. Now, even the way I said it right now, I could have said cancel flight, like, CANCEL, or I could have said canceled because I have a slight accent. I'm from Romania originally, right? But then the speech to text might have not picked up that nuance. And all of a sudden, the differences between I want to cancel my flight and I have a canceled flight is quite substantial from a business process standpoint. So when you're working with the imperfection of the environment, instead of just kind of keep promising like, oh, we'll give you 100% accuracy on speech to text, which is impossible, accept the imperfection of the environment you're operating in, and then build tooling that allows you to deal with the imperfection. And that's what we do at NLX very well.
Mm. And so how would an example of that tooling work then in that use case where you've got someone says cancel my flight or cancelled flight? What are you doing? Are you using something? Would you recommend using something like authenticating the user and then bringing in context from what you know of them, either the CRM or whatever, to then check essentially what's their current status of their current flight,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can, I mean, arguably you could do that and get away with them not even saying flight cancelled, because you can look for yourself, find that out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole need for the utterance in the first place. But like,
Mm-hmm.
what like techniques you'd recommend to deal with some of the imperfections of speech recognition in particular?
It's certainly rooted in design. And one choice could be what you described, where having good access to, background on the customer, to then basically know that, hey, this person's flight just got canceled. So that's probably what they mean, so they can make an assumption. Frankly, what typically works well is just asking, are you calling about, are you looking to cancel an existing flight? They say no. Then you can make a very safe assumption they're trying to, they have a canceled flight, and kind of take them from there. And similarly, design is also like a fantastic way to solve problems for, gaining trust with the end user. Because we all know that there's a plethora of bad conversational AI assistants out there. And, I remember we've seen in some deployments, like people, like someone was able to squeeze in like 15 zeros to try to get to an agent just because they were used to it. But when you greet someone in personally, where it's like, hello, thank you for calling XYZ business, how can I assist you today? Versus, let's say, we'll use an airline example again, like, hello, Kane, thank you for calling. I see you have an upcoming flight from London to New York. Is this what you're calling about? You could hate every single bot in existence. You will say yes to that question because it's contextual, and you're calling not because you want to chit chat. You're trying to solve your problem. So then you'll kind of fast track. Now, in order to facilitate good design, you need to have really good analytics. So the way we do analytics within our platform, within the NLX platform, has a couple different layers. We have like the typical, you'll have like dashboards and charts and things like that. But we also have like some pretty unique like conversation design level analytics, where you can see the overlay of how traffic applies to the design itself. Because if you and I solve the same business problem, our designs are almost guaranteed to not be the same, whether you're moving nodes a little bit differently or whatever it is, they'll be distinct. So then it's useful to kind of see how customers engage with the design directly. And then where you see drop-offs or anything like that's off, you can make corrections. And that's also the reason why we don't typically recommend and don't rely and don't encourage customers to rely on metrics like containment. That's a pretty poor measure of user experience, because like, I can give you 100% containment by not allowing you to ever get to an agent. But that doesn't mean you're going to, want to do business with that brand anymore. So like we're being very thoughtful about, again, accepting the chaotic nature of the environment that you operate in, where end users can say whatever they want, whenever they want, and then rooting the latest innovations in the conversational AI space in practicality, so you can actually make it usable by enterprises.
So what you were talking about there, which is kind of like fusing the analytics with the design, does that mean, what I think of when I hear that is you'll open up some kind of canvas which has got your dialogue nodes and everything all over the place, and then from your design canvas you will be able to see from, let's say, the how can I help you node, you'll be able to do analysis at the design level to say, well, what did people say at this point and how can we change that? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's exactly it. So basically you can see, let's say 100% of the traffic came to this node, then it split over here, then it dropped off over there. And then you can also apply tags, unique tags at the different parts of the conversation. Because let's use another example. Let's say I want to track automation for a specific use case. Containment is not a good measure of automation, and neither is getting necessarily to the end of the flow. Maybe the flow incorporates a survey that the customer just opts not to continue, but if they got far enough through the flow where they solved their business problem, so you want to track that. So we also kind of keep this analytics engine flexible so that our customers pick the analytics and the KPIs that make sense to them, as opposed to just giving them out of the box metrics and saying, well, that's all you get because we know best, because we built this. Like, you don't know best. You know best. You're the business owner. You know what actually is a measure of quality for your business.
Yeah. So and every conversation is different, isn't it? So if you have that flight cancel example, if someone wants to cancel their flight or rebook a flight, there inevitably you need to integrate that conversation with a line of business system of some description, and then when that task is fulfilled, that line of business system will give you a success. Yes, it's happened, kind of thing, which then the assistant can then say, okay, fantastic, I've cancelled your flight. So so you might tag that the node that says thank you, I've cancelled it, so you can say that's a successfully fulfilled transaction. But that's going to be different for every single conversation because every use case is different, and this is part of the challenge for analytics providers that just do analytics specifically, is because we view it as like there's 3 layers to analytics. You've got the conversation analytics, which is like a little bit of what we've been discussing. When someone says, how can I help you? What's the fallback rate on every turn and sequence, and what's the escalation rate, and is the escalations happening in a place where you would expect it to or not? In fact, that's kind of next level. And then, so that's conversation level, NLU intent. So that. Then the business level is, did we get the job done or not? Which is, and you can't do that without that tagging that you express, because every single conversation, the measure of success is different. And then the third layer is the customer journey layer. So if I have a conversation with an assistant today and I leave, the assistant can try and tag as much as it can, but if I call back the contact center in 2 days' time about the same issue, the assistant hasn't done its job. So tying together the broader customer journey piece. So I think analytics for everything is always going to require thought and manual intervention. And it's nice to hear that you're kind of approaching it in that sort of flexible fashion, rather than just saying, right, you've designed a conversation, now here's your metrics, here's your confidence score, here's the out of the box stuff, and now use that. Because that's what a lot of providers do. With some of the big folks who I don't want to name names in that, but you can probably guess the big cloud providers will give you very go on,
That's exactly it. And ultimately, we just listen to the customers. We see what matters to them, and that's how we build our product. We build our product to oftentimes, to be honest, even when we win customers over, because we're honest, even at the potential risk of losing the business because we say something different than the rest of the pack. But we'd rather just tell them what's practical and what makes sense than to just deceive them that they'll get some form of magic. And for that reason, even the concept of you touched on, you picked up on the Canvas component, because we do have a Canvas that's no code, and you can sort of scaffold the business logic, if you may. Sometimes people mistake that for like, oh, well, so it's rules based. It's like, no, it's AI based. It's NLP powered, especially to kind of identify the intent, to capture different entities and slots, right? As the conversation progresses. And let's say if I say I want to replace my damaged gold card, I'm not going to ask you what card type or what's the replacement reason for the card, because I already picked that up, right? So like, it has all that intelligence, but then business processes are structured. Any form of AI model is statistical by definition, which is absolutely guaranteed to be imperfect. So you can't afford an AI to decide to skip steps in a business process because the confidence score said so. So we take that very seriously, but then we pair it with the more free-form, unstructured interaction that's powered by large language models in a we're always focused on rooting that in practicality and brand safety, if you may. But then, instead of managing 200 FAQs or knowledge-based items, yeah, sure. That one you can keep a little bit more freeform, so it's flexible when people ask questions, but there's always a component where the conversation has to follow a somewhat structured path. And that's okay, because if it yields good self-service rates and high customer satisfaction, you're solving the problem. It doesn't really matter how you solve it if it addresses the needs.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, which is that when you get beyond the so we've got this sort of like use case maturity model, which is called DITAT, which essentially starts with the D, which is deflecting, and that's where a lot of companies start. They'll start with use cases that are just deflective in nature. I ask a question, signpost them to a web page, or ask a question, answer a question. It doesn't really do anything. It just answers questions and points you to different places.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got like assisting, which is maybe that's like a one-way retrieval of data from a system. So you're actually starting to be helpful. You're assisting, or a good example of assisting is routing. So someone says something. Oh, sorry, the I is interpreting. Sorry. So a good example of interpreting is routing. So someone comes to the chatbot and says, "I need to cancel my flight." You would route them to the appropriate agent because you know what they want, kind of thing. You know what the intent is, or you would interpret their need and retrieve something from a line of business system and answer a query. Then you move to transacting, which is two-way integrations. That's where you're getting into the business process kind of side of things. And then you're on to assisting, which is being more proactive. We've mentioned a few of those things, like using the data that you have CRM to preempt what the conversation is going to be about. And then transforming, which is the kind of like a stage where the AI assistant is doing things that humans just couldn't possibly do, transform in terms of business process and business models. And so that transacting part, the middle part, is where people are starting to get to. They've done some FAQs. They've done some like one-way data retrieval. When's my package going to be delivered? It's going to be there on Tuesday. I want to order a package now, or I want to change the delivery now. So now you're moving into transacting. And in those cases, you cannot escape business rules because businesses are based
you absolutely cannot.
Processes. And so I'm curious to get what your thoughts are on large language models at the moment when it comes to the more, because those are the higher value use cases, really, because it's and so you hear and you'll read a lot about large language models being the future. Generative AI is absolutely going to turn this whole kind of conversational AI industry on its head. But as you said, anything statistical that doesn't have that logic behind it is prone to fault. So I'm curious about where you think your thoughts generally, first of all, on large language models and what's been going on with large language models, the attention it's been having, but then crucially, what is the role of large language models in your view when it comes to enterprise automation?
I think one of their best strength is in highest levels of utility, especially like around enterprise use cases and customers, revolve around accuracy, improving accuracy, intent detection accuracy, where with drastically less training data, you can better identify what the customer intent is. So you drive them to the right business process or to the right question and whatnot, which right now with traditional NLP providers, someone comes in and they're not semantic at all. So then like someone says the question's slightly different, that doesn't use the same words that maybe they had in the training data, and all of a sudden it's thrown off and it just creates a poor experience. Large language models solve that problem, which is quite fantastic. And that's where, the differences between the different models can matter here, because you might have like 10-20% differences, which when it comes to accuracy could be quite high. So that's one fantastic use case we see for like the, let's say, in conversation mode, if you may.
In that
then
example,
you have
sorry, before moving on, in that example, you're not using the LLM specifically for classification, are you? Or are you using the LLM? Are you using the LLM on its own for classification, or are you using the LLM in conjunction with an intent model to bring greater accuracy to the intent model?
Good. Thank you for asking that. Good clarification. So we are using the LLM as a way to boost the accuracy of the traditional NLP model.
Right.
So we've gone, and we're going to announce this one particular feature within the next week or so. It's going to be called NLX Boost. Go figure. And it effectively augments the NLP and then improves, like boosts the confidence. Because oftentimes a lot of the NLPs that we integrate, like on Amazon, like for Google Dialogflow, they do a decent job at identifying the intent, but not always with the right level of confidence. And that can fluctuate quite highly. And in especially in cases of like low confidence and things like that, our implementation of these large language models can actually significantly boost the confidence score, and then it basically drives. We've gotten like over 90% boost in performance over traditional NLP by using the NLX Boost feature I'm talking about. So so in a sense, the way we've implemented it, it results in 0% false negatives, because typically, or false positives, my bad, because it typically, just boosts the confidence of what the NLP is already kind of thinking it's the right thing. And then if the LLM also kind of hits with high confidence, that in practice, it turns out it's quite powerful. So
Yeah.
that's how we do it.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to check I understand what you're saying here. The primary the primary problem that's solving is that when you have an utterance that doesn't have high confidence on anything, so otherwise it's going to trigger a fallback and say whatever it's going to say. Is that where you would use it? Mop up everything else that's not classified, and you wouldn't use it on the ones which have already got high confidence, or do you use it on everything as a matter of course?
We use it, and I guess I'd say a majority of the use cases. Sometimes if there's situations where it's straightforward to infer high confidence from the NLP, in which case we're like, okay, we'll save the extra network call. For all the other cases, we go to the LLM anyways. Now, there is a difference here. When I say LLM, I don't mean we're going to a third party like OpenAI or Cohere. We have some flavor of our own LLM that's deployed within our own premises. So like the response times are like sub 100 milliseconds. So it has minimal performance impact on the user experience, and that's pretty important to us holistically. So we've implemented it in a way that's just very efficient, and it doesn't add a lot of additional load to the many things that make up the stack, right, of a conversational assistant, especially when you're talking voice, right? Over chat, you have a little bit more leeway in how fast you respond, but over voice, it has to feel pretty natural. So.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, apologies, I did cut you off last time because we were going through some other areas where you think LLMs are, where they work well for enterprise automation.
So I guess for anyone who's watching this and isn't super familiar maybe to the depths of LLMs or what they produce, in general, they kind of have like two outputs. One's a generative output, which is what we've been seeing with the likes of ChatGPT and Claude from Anthropic and other things. And then the other output is embeddings. So anything that's leveraging the embeddings is typically what we consider safe for the enterprise, because it typically then provides control. It gives hints of what the topic in question might be, and then we pair that with the more structured or brand approved language, like let's say driving knowledge based type of questions, but like with brand approved language. And then there's the generative portion that we don't see a lot of practicality for it during the runtime itself, except for use cases where maybe you might summarize the conversation before you escalate it to an agent, or even if you just want to summarize the conversation as you consolidate the transcript, right, in the system, so that basically if someone reviews it, they don't have to necessarily, they can just look at the high level description, if you may. But we see fantastic use of the generative portion of the large language models within the product itself. So fast tracking authoring, improving, generation, whether it's generation of training data, or we recently announced and introduced a generative component within our canvas itself, where if you're trying to, let's say, examples of capturing user inputs and validating them and basically doing retry logic. So rather like for these things that can get a little finicky when you build them out, because you do need a little bit of a programmatic thinking when you're laying them out, even though it's no code. Nothing's rocket science, but if it can save you 5 minutes, there's value out there. So we see the generative text component being quite valuable when it comes to authoring within the product. So we've been investing quite a bit there. Also because it's safe. Because ultimately we see the generative AI or generative text. I like to kind of put the text in there because generative AI is a very broad spectrum. We see the use cases that tolerate imperfection are fantastic for the generative text component. Customer-facing enterprise use cases are not. They do not tolerate the imperfection that these large language models can do. Like I remember when Expedia, there's lots of examples in the market, but I remember when Expedia announced their ChatGPT integration, it took 5 minutes to break it and get it to engage on competitive conversations, on political conversation, incorrect political facts. So it's like, that, don't do that to your brand. That's just not, I mean, generative text is effectively a large autocomplete. It's a smarter autocomplete than what we're used to, but it's what it is. So it will make mistakes. And what we see with a lot of large customers, they have no tolerance for those kind of mistakes.
Yeah, I kind of I've been describing it as like depending on the degree of consequence of getting it wrong. Like, what's the consequence of getting something wrong? If it's a highly consequential use case, you don't really want to touch it. If the consequences of getting it wrong are really, really low, then fine, experiment. But it's like, how do you determine what a highly consequential use case is and what isn't? How do you determine where accuracy is important and where it's not? Like an example of where you might find that accuracy is perhaps not quite as important is in general kind of chit chat. Like if a chatbot is there specifically to have small talk and specifically to be there to be spoken with it about anything, you would imagine that might be you get away with it. And then I look at Snapchat, which was the kind of like launch partner for OpenAI's GPT 3.5. It might even be the ChatGPT API. And I don't know if you know the Center of Human Technology. I don't know if you've come across some of their stuff, but fantastic organization doing a lot of stuff to further the cause for responsible AI. And they uncovered through playing around with Snapchat's chatbot that they essentially posed as a 13-year-old girl, told this AI that she'd met somebody 18 years her senior, and through a series of conversations managed to say that I'm going on holiday with him and we're planning on having sex for the first time. How do I make my first time special? And throughout all of these opportunities for the AI to say something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, it just went along with the whole time. And in the end, it ended up saying something akin to, it's important to make sure your first time's special. Try lightening the mood by playing music and lighting candles. So it's like even something you would think is like
That's unbelievable.
Chat, yeah, and it's accuracy is not important because if we get you to say it's all right, but then all of a sudden you can find it to the point where it's not picking up on real sort of red flags. So I'm kind of like I agree with everything you've said so far, and I think that everything that you've said is things that either we've done or I've seen. Not necessarily we've done, but I mean like I've come across most of this kind of stuff, and it's all exactly what you would sort of hope for. But I don't know about you, but my kind of like apprehension about all of this is that it's that in live public facing situations there is just a lot of risk in just letting these things kind of
100%. I mean, anything outside of pure entertainment, and even then you just gave this example, right? That's pretty eerie with Snapchat. People make the the mistake of thinking that when you call brands that somehow we want to chit chat. Nobody calls an airline or a bank or like a retailer because, hey, I'm just gonna have like a 10-minute conversation with this thing. Because there's like vendors out there like touting, like they're showing use cases where you have babies crying in the background. It's like, how's your day? Oh, it was like this and that, chatting with the AI assistant. Nobody does that. I'm pissed. I have a problem. Your service or product isn't meeting my spec, and I'm going out, I'm basically going out of my way to waste time to address this issue that shouldn't have been there in the first place. I want to finish my transaction with you as fast as possible. So even the very premise of like enabling that too much of that chit chat in practice doesn't exist. I remember even when I was at Amex, we spent so much time on like little features where, we wanted to be smart and like, if the customer says like, oh, I want to replace my platinum card. Oh, wait, no, it's my gold card. Nobody talks like that. Those things don't get triggered. 80-90% of the use cases just get tackled. Some of them are complex, right? So there's important technology techniques that can fit in, and we do some of this stuff where you need to deploy in order to solve some of the more complex use cases. But most of these companies have like 5 to 10 use cases that represent the majority of their volume that basically need to be tackled in order to solve the issues. So just focus on those and let the on the other hand, technologies like ChatGPT are freaking fantastic for consumers. I use it. There's all kinds of fast track things that you can use it for. It provides value, but it doesn't have the same value across industries or use cases or you get the gist. But
Yeah. Do you think we'll get to a stage where the novelty will wear off? A little bit like sort of like with Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. That's the closest thing I can kind of compare it to, which is the same kind of thing. Ask it something, get a response back. Tell it to do something, it'll do something for you. And what used to have, there was a really great study, and I'd be interested to see if the same thing's happening with ChatGPT. There's a really interesting study which showed that when people first get a voice assistant, like Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant, what happens is if you imagine a graph and the vertical axis is level of experimentation and the bottom axis is time, what you find is the level of experimentation peaks when they get the device. So that's when they're first trying everything. They're trying music, timers, skills. They're trying all kind of stuff because it's new and it's novel. Then what happens is they realize it can't do certain things. And so the level of experimentation drops in time. But then it peaks every now and then. So the level of experimentation peaks when someone comes around. Oh, you've got an Alexa. Oh, yeah, look, it can do this. Oh, have you tried this? Oh, no. And then they'll experiment again. So there's these little peaks and troughs of experimentation. And for Amazon, the idea is hopefully when someone experiments with something, finds a new feature, they continue using that feature. But I don't know whether that's Alexa, because you speak to anyone who's got an Amazon Alexa device now, and they're still just playing the radio and playing music. And so
and lights, if you have them,
heating and lights, yeah. So and when I use ChatGPT as well, and I've been using it a lot for getting ideas started for blog articles. Like I'll take a podcast transcription, throw part of it into ChatGPT, generate me an article. We use it for generating some social media posts of the videos we do. So we'll give it the video transcript. We'll say write a social media post for that. But I've noticed, and it always requires rewriting quite heavily, because I've noticed a pattern, which is it just grabs random lines, rewords them, and puts them together again, which isn't necessarily the same as adding your own interpretation of what's just happened. It's just taking what's happened and doing it slightly, cutting bits out and reconfiguring it. And so I've noticed a little bit of a pattern when it comes to giving it something to summarize. It's not necessarily great at creating off the back of the things that you give it. It's fairly good at summarizing to an extent where it still requires attention, still requires a lot of work to get to. So I don't know whether you feel the same, and this is not necessarily an enterprise automation question. This is purely as a consumer of technology. It seems to me as though I can recognize slight patterns with it, certainly for the use cases that I use it for. And I don't know whether or not it's kind of the be all and end all that it's kind of being made out to be. I don't know what your thoughts are.
That's an interesting question, and honestly, I don't. I mean, the novelty will taper off at some point, but I think it will just become commonplace. It will just be the standard, just like Google is the standard. Like within Google, I mean, we everyone, I mean, takes it for granted nowadays. But there's such sophisticated technology that goes behind. I mean, as a matter of fact, they invented the transformer. Google search is powered by the same architecture that ChatGPT is, right? Packaged differently, and OpenAI was just very creative in marketing it. But I think you as these innovations, these disruptive innovations get mass adoption, maybe the wow effect goes away, but you just take it as commonplace. I mean, I've grown with the internet, so I remember anything from dial-up and the initial like shitty-looking websites to now like the powerful stuff that you can do today, and the fact that you can go on an app and like summon a car to take you from point A to point B. Like that's absolutely commonplace today. Nobody thinks about that as any form of like exciting innovation. But when it first came out, like I remember I was in New York, so thankfully that was the playground of both Lyft and Uber. It was the best freaking thing. And I think we'll see the same with the likes of ChatGPT and all the other similar technologies. It does introduce a layer of innovation that I think, as it gets packaged into more products and services, it will continue to deliver on an elevated level of utility. Like just as I referenced our new feature in the canvas where you can just kind of like type free form and get various capabilities. One of our front-end engineers just kept calling out this use case, and I'm going to share it because I found it interesting. A lot of input validation, if you want to do it right, typically boils down to some form of regular expressions, which are non-trivial to write. Not everyone knows how to write them. This thing in freeform, when you ask it, because it's using one of these generative engines, it spits out perfectly working like regular expressions. Like I can't imagine like wanting to like go write regular expressions by hand anymore. And yes, even if you do them, with ChatGPT, you might need to make some tweaks and whatnot. It's fine. You still then have to write the whole thing. And that applies to a lot of other use cases, like writing drafts for a website or an article. And sure, you're not going to take it, whatever it was given, you'll make some changes, but it still kind of gets you a little bit further. So I think we'll see a lot more. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of companies, right, that they're building like thin layers around the likes of ChatGPT. But some of those are really creative. And when you put them in good context, like I've seen these widgets that just kind of summarize the article or the things you see on a page, or we are recently part of an accelerator, generative AI accelerator for Comcast. And one of the companies in the program, they're called W Scripted. Shout out to Ellie from W Scripted. They their mission is more broadly like looking to impact sort of diversity in Hollywood and just kind of make everything more equitable. And one of the components of their product they're offering is to summarize movie scripts and distill them into more digestible readouts, and quickly extracting like key elements, any character development, and all kinds of other attributes. I don't want to like go deeper than this because it's not my area of expertise, but I found it to be like a really interesting use of the generative technology that otherwise requires like 3 days to read the book and all kinds of other things that can now be done in like a couple minutes, and you digest a lot more content. So I'm excited by whatever this future, the normalization of the technology will bring, because I think it will just kind of create this new normal of expectation, I guess.
100%. It's the new normal of ambient computing, as how I see it. Everything being conversational, which is the kind of vision we were talking a lot about with Alexa in 2017. Is like computing should be ambient, utterance away wherever you are, And don't get me wrong, like as I say, we use it all the time. I use it all the time, and what it does with the transcripts is like one of the transcripts, for example. from a previous podcast, it's generated like 3 ideas for articles off one transcript. And the thing about transcripts is if anyone wants to sit there and read a transcript, as engaging as this conversation we're having now is, if you were to read this transcript, the details would just be lost in all of the stuff that goes into having an actual dialogue. And so it's really good at just like getting rid of the things like half of this sentence that I'm saying, like these last 5 words have been pointless. But the bit that's important about what I'm about to say is that ChatGPT is really good at taking the meat and getting rid of the rubbish. So in what I've just said so far, the only important thing I've said so far is ChatGPT is good at getting rid of fluff and keeping the main stuff. But if you were to read the transcript, it would take you forever to draw that insight out. So it's really good at that kind of thing. I definitely think it will be the most systems will have it included into some degree. I think most interfaces are going to become conversational, as we've been talking about here. But you touched on something which is interesting, which I've only seen, I think, 2 other companies do, which is turning your platform itself into a conversational interface, as in the way that you use the actual software is by typing to it, and I think that's what we'll see a lot more of, is that the way that you actually programs and software and SaaS services is by just explaining what you want it to do, or asking it to do a task, or asking it to generate something for you, and then it will manipulate the software to do such.
Yeah, and we landed on that because the premise of it is once you have a solid foundation and the building blocks that can, let's say, create resources, train an intent, do this, do that, you can incorporate those into, if you can contrive those into fewer steps, because ultimately conversational AI is great for use cases that in situations where you can reduce the number of steps. If I'm doing the same steps as like clicking on a page, then it's kind of pointless to fit the use case through that. But if it would take me 5 steps in a, let's say, non-conversational use, and it takes 2 over conversational, that's a fantastic way. So if I can just verbalize a bunch of things and quickly, or type a bunch of things and then quickly just reduce the number, get the intended result and reduce the number of steps, it's great. So we're working with our customers, and we invite them, like, go break it, go say all kinds of things that you might want this to do, and then we work backwards from that to figure out how do we enable that more and more to accelerate their let's say development, design, whatever they're trying to do. And ultimately, as a conversational AI company, what type of company would we be if we didn't use our own technology to drive efficiency within our products and services with it?
Definitely. It's very meta, isn't it? Conversational AI company
Yes.
creating using conversational AI to help people create conversational AI.
Exactly.
Classic. Quick shout out to Richard E. Orty, who said, great conversation, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert Wethmer, for joining in as well. We've got a question from Richard, if you game, which is, can ChatGPT or another AI software plug into a comment section, like the comment section we have going on here, in a live selling situation?
I wouldn't see why not. And I feel I've bumped into a company that was trying to do this. I mean, it's just great because it can distill. I've seen, so I guess maybe Richard, I hope I'll maybe give you an answer to something I've experienced recently. So I'm in a founder group in New York, and I don't know, it's a WhatsApp group with a couple hundred people in it. And the administrators of the group introduced this concept a few weeks back, where on a weekly basis they use ChatGPT to summarize all the topics discussed, because it's a very noisy channel. Like on any given day, you might have like, I don't know, 30, 40 threads going on, each with their own sets of messages, but in the same thing, right? So it's very hard to like keep track of everything. But it then distills, it summarizes this entire thing, and then it's very cool to kind of like read those emails, because they break it down into like different sections, and all of it is just kind of generated automatically. It helps when you have a bunch of engineers who are trying to like remove the repetitive tasks. So I could totally see that being applied to comments as well, especially in a live conversation. And I think it would be also really interesting, let's say if you're in a live sales conversation where, let's say maybe Kane's trying to sell me something or I'm trying to sell something to him. And then as we're having the hour-long conversation, the AI, whether ChatGPT or something else, can then like peel off the action items or, already kind of like summarizes the follow-up. Like if we're talking about like, oh, I'm going to send you a deck, maybe it preps the email with a deck and I just revise it and hit send. I think there's a lot of opportunities for things like that. That one, they could totally be done today. It wouldn't be like a very heavy integration, but its utility could be just massive.
I mean, if you look at, so these comments are coming through LinkedIn here. Jacob says, I think I've seen it used on Twitter. These comments are coming through LinkedIn here, but we're not on I'm not on LinkedIn now. So these comments are coming into a different platform.
That's cool.
From LinkedIn. So that means that the comments are being moved from their original state via an API to a new state. Therefore, there's nothing stopping these comments from being sent somewhere else where a model can analyze them. Is one thing. But it sounds as though actually what Richard's might be describing, it could be that some of the agent assist technology could be useful in that sort of environment. So there's lots of providers that do this sort of thing, but Balto is one that I'm more familiar with, where let's say you call a contact center or you're on a live chat, the person on the other side of it who's having the live conversation has essentially an AI assistant that sits in the chat with them, and it's looking at what they're saying, it's looking at what the customer's saying, and all the way through it's guiding them and giving them things like next best action. It's recognizing the customer intent. This person wants to cancel their flight. Do you want to do that now? And the agent's basically got their own personal assistant that sits alongside the chat. So there you go. So it's known as agent assist essentially. So there's lots of there's lots of solutions out there for that. I'm pretty sure, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Andre, but I'm pretty sure that with the NLX technology, you could probably knock something up that does something similar.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we do work with some customers on that, and we're looking to further evolve that as time goes. But yeah, absolutely. The cool thing is, once you have the building blocks, you can expand to so many different directions and use cases, and that's where the fun arises once you can add the abstraction layers over like the solid foundation.
Nice one. Cool. Any kind of final thoughts, Andre? Any sort of like last pieces of advice that you would give people for implementing this kind of stuff, whether it's generative or whether it's kind of the intent-based stuff, anything to do with implementing conversational AI in the enterprise for customer experience and business transformation? What are some of the kind of like key things that you want people to take away from this conversation?
If you can take one thing away from this conversation, just be honest and practical with the customer and the implementation. There's a lot of, I think, misrepresentation and guidance in the market. Like, you have these like, it's magic, it's a panacea, it does this, it does that. It does whatever you get to do, but ultimately there's a practicality that layer that you kind of have to put around these use cases and these technologies to actually make them usable by end users. So put yourself in the shoes of the end user, and if you wouldn't engage a certain way, chances are probably others wouldn't either. So just like we're focused on practicality, just move away from magic and just get these things to do work that makes sense. So a little bit abstract, but I think it would be a good thing.
Are you a golfer? Do you play golf or not?
I have played golf. I wouldn't say I'm good. I'm looking to evolve my skills. Let's put it there.
I've played golf. I wouldn't call myself good either, but my dad is a keen golfer. I use this anecdote all the time, but I think it rings true, which is that my dad always says that it's drive in for show, put in for door, which means that you can hit the ball a mile and do the nice show off stuff that looks really cool. But at the end of the day, if you can't do the boring stuff, which is just put the ball in the hole when you get close to the hole, then the whole thing's pointless. So it's the boring stuff that matters, and I think that that's what I'm more interested in as well, which is the practical side of doing this stuff, not the big, sexy, overhyped kind of potential future.
Hmm.
What can you do today?
Hmm.
And what can you do properly? And I think that the
Hmm.
word you were looking for when you were mentioning overhype there, Andre, was bullshit. Because as I'm
That's correct.
bullshit out there at the moment, it's frustrating. But anyway, I think we ended on a good point. Be pragmatic.
Certainly. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you for joining me as well. So NLX is nlx.ai, am I right? Website?
Yeah, that's correct.
NLX.ai. If this conversation has intrigued you sufficiently, which I imagine it has done, head yourself over to nlx.ai to find out more about. And I think we were saying before, you can actually just go there, get onto the platform, register, and start building, can't you?
Yep. If you don't, send me an email, andre@nlx.ai, and I'll make sure you get there. So
perfect. We
thank you
will
so much.
put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Andre, for joining me. It's absolutely fantastic. Do not forget, if you haven't registered for Unparsed yet, the website is unparsedconf.com. It's 2-for-1 right now on the tickets for the world's first conversation design conference happening in London on July 24th to 25th. The 2-for-1 will be coming off at the end of this week, so you've got like probably 24 hours if you do want to get there. And I think there's probably actually, I want to say about 20 tickets, maybe 15 tickets left. So there's not very many. So get yourself there if you do want to be there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Thank you, Andre, for joining me as well. Absolute pleasure. And we'll see